Every single day, people walk into work and never walk back out. Not because of accidents, not because of bad luck, but because the people in charge knew exactly what could go wrong and did nothing to stop it. In every story you were about to hear, a camera was rolling. It caught everything. So why did these companies still get away with it? It was a warm August morning in Moneta, Virginia, and Alison Parker was smiling into the camera. She was 24 years old, a reporter for WDBJ7, and she loved her job more than almost anything. She had worked hard to get here. She had a boyfriend at the station, a future she was building, and a morning segment to finish about tourism at Bridgewater Plaza. The location was open and public. Boats drifted on the water behind her. Tourists passed on the boardwalk nearby. And nobody thought twice about security because there was nothing to think about. It was just a Tuesday. Cameraman Adam Ward had his lens pointed at her, and the broadcast was live. Hundreds of thousands of viewers across Virginia were watching their morning coffee go cold. Alison was mid-sentence, cheerful and focused, completely unaware that someone was already standing close behind Adam, watching, waiting, and holding a camera of his own. Vester Lee Flanagan had worked at WDBJ7 until he was fired months earlier. His exit had not been quiet. He had filed a complaint, made threats, and had to be walked out of the building by police. The station knew exactly who he was. They knew what he was capable of. But when he left that day, nobody took his press credentials. Nobody deactivated his access. There was no protocol for that. So our terminated staff credentials were simply never reviewed. Flanagan still existed in the system as an active employee. He walked onto that public plaza that morning as a credentialed WDBJ7 journalist, and nobody stopped him, questioned him, or even looked twice. The security gap was not a mystery. It was an ignored checklist item, and Alison Parker paid for it with her life. Adam Ward was killed too. Interview subject Vicky Gardner survived by dropping to the ground and staying still. The attack was broadcast live across Virginia. Flanagan filmed it himself and posted the footage to social media within seconds. 2 cameras, 2 angles, one completely preventable morning. The footage spread before anyone could stop it. Viewers watching the live broadcast saw it happen in real time before the studio could cut the feed. Phones lit up across the state. The WDBJ7 newsroom fell silent. Flanagan fled in a car while the whole country started searching his name. Police tracked him down hours later on a Virginia highway. He shot himself before they could take him into custody. There was no trial, no courtroom, no moment where someone in a suit had to answer for the credential that never got deactivated. Alison's father spent the years that followed fighting for gun reform legislation. The station faced no meaningful legal accountability for the security failure that put a known threat back on their property. The camera caught everything. The one thing it could not catch was someone doing their job before the shooting started. No executive was charged. No policy was enforced. A simple offboarding checklist, the kind that takes 10 minutes to complete, did not exist. Alison Parker was 24 years old. She was killed on a camera she trusted, in a job she loved, by a man the company already knew was dangerous. And the credential that let him walk back into her life was never once reviewed. It was a Thursday morning at a Dallas area distribution warehouse, and the floor was already moving. Forklifts hummed, boxes stacked. The morning shift had punched in, and the supervisor, a man who had worked that floor for over a decade, was making his rounds. Jorge Lerma had been brought into a small HR office earlier that morning and told his position was being eliminated. The meeting was brief. He was calm. He shook no hands, but raised no voice. A security escort walked him to the front entrance and watched him leave. Management exhaled. Standard termination. Done. What nobody knew was that Lerma had spent years in that building, and he knew something the security team apparently did not. The rear loading entrance had a keypad lock that staff had been propping open with a rubber wedge during shift changes for months. It was faster than punching the code. Everyone did it. A safety audit 6 months earlier had flagged it as a low priority concern. The note sat in a report that nobody followed up on. The wedge stayed in the door. Lerma returned to the warehouse less than 2 hours after being walked out the front. He came in through the back. The rear entry camera had a blind spot at that angle. Nobody was watching the feed. He moved through the building the way someone moves when they know exactly where they are going. He knew the layout. He knew the shift patterns. He knew where the supervisor would be. The front of warehouse cameras picked up the sequence from a distance. Workers scattering, a figure moving with purpose through the loading area. The supervisor near the dock, no time to react, no reason to have expected this. First responders arrived in under 4 minutes. It was already over. The footage was reviewed within the hour by investigators who immediately identified the rear entry point as the critical failure. The OSHA investigation confirmed what the footage already showed. The unsecured rear entrance was the access point. The propped door that had been flagged 6 months earlier and quietly forgotten had been the open wound in the building's security. The company paid fines. No criminal charges were filed against any member of management. The 11 other former employees were later discovered to still have active building access that had never been revoked after their departures. The warehouse implemented a new access review policy in the weeks following the shooting. It was the same policy that should have existed the morning Lerma was terminated. A rubber wedge in a door, a safety note in a forgotten report, a key card that should have stopped working the moment he walked out the front. The camera caught him coming back in. Nobody was watching. It was a Tuesday morning in Fresno, and the building looked like any other mid-size office on any other workday. The front desk was busy. The break room smelled like coffee. People moved through the corridors with cups in their hands and phones at their ears. When a man walked through the front entrance at 10:43 in the morning and badged in without stopping. The woman at the desk glanced up, recognized his face, and looked back down at her screen. He had worked there before. His contract had ended weeks ago, but his face still belonged here in her mind, and his keycard still said so to the machine. Nobody had told the machine otherwise. The company's offboarding process had a clear step for deactivating digital credentials through the IT system. It had no parallel step for physical access cards. Contractors were told to return their keycards when their contracts ended. There was no follow-up system, no collection process, no audit. His card had been active and unmonitored for weeks after his final shift. He walked past colleagues who nodded at him. He walked into the break room where several employees were on their morning break. The internal surveillance camera was running. It recorded faces, timestamps, the ordinary texture of a morning that had no reason to turn. The footage, later shown to investigators, captured the moment the room changed, workers reacting, the sudden collapse of a normal Tuesday into something that cannot be untaken. Responding units arrived within minutes. The building went into lockdown. The footage was pulled within the hour. Post-incident review found 11 other former employees with active keycards still in their possession. The company issued a public statement. Fines were paid. A new offboarding checklist was introduced. No executive faced personal liability for the gap that had existed for years in plain sight. The front door camera had captured him badge in at 10:43. The badge reader had logged it. The system had accepted it. Every layer of technology had functioned exactly as it was built to function. The only thing missing was a human being who had decided to close the gap before someone walked through it. He badged in through the front door of a building he no longer worked in. Every camera in that facility was running. Not one alarm sounded, because nobody had ever bothered to tell the system he was gone. 3 different buildings, 3 different cities, 3 different companies. But the same story told 3 times over. A known threat walked back through a door that should have been locked. A camera recorded everything. And the people responsible for closing that door faced nothing more than a fine and a policy update that came too late for the people already gone. Alison Parker was 24 years old. She had worked every single day to earn that on-air seat. She had a future, a relationship, a career that was just beginning to open up. The man who killed her had been escorted out of that building by police. The station had documentation of his threats. They had every reason to act and every tool to do it. A 10-minute credential review was all it would have taken. Nobody did it. She died on a live broadcast while hundreds of thousands of people watched their screens and could not look away. The supervisor at that Dallas warehouse had given over a decade of his life to that floor. He knew every corner of that building, every face on every shift. The man who came back for him used that same familiarity to walk straight past every weak point in a security system held together by habit and ignored paperwork, a rubber wedge, a forgotten audit note, a door that was never supposed to stay open. That was the gap between a man going home to his family and a camera recording his final minutes. In Fresno, a keycard reader beeped green at 10:43 in the morning and nobody questioned it. Not the front desk, not the security system, not a single manager who had ever looked at the offboarding process and thought to ask what happened to the physical cards. 11 other former employees still had active access to that building on the day of the shooting. 11. The company knew its own headcount. Nobody ever ran the audit. These were not freak accidents. There was no unpredictable moment, no unavoidable collision of circumstances. Every single one of these deaths had a paper trail that led directly to the moment it happened. The warnings were written down, the gaps were known, the fixes were simple. And, in every case, the company looked at the cost of closing the gap and decided it was not worth their time. The cameras were always rolling. The question was never whether it would be caught. The question was whether anyone in charge would care enough to act before it was.